Good evening, folks. How's everybody doing?
Good. How are you?
Not too
Hi.
bad. Okay. So let's start by going over last week's assignment. I uploaded the video of last week's class and uploaded it to YouTube, but then completely forgot to send an email after class saying that I had done that. So my apologies there. And if you were, if you're running late, if you're running late with your assignment or something like that, I won't hold it against you because I screwed up. So, but most everybody that's here turned something in. So let's start with Chloe. Let me share my screen. Okay. All right. Gotcha. So we click and it turns it green. So let's check out your code. Okay. Okay. So, Chloe, did you look up how to do this somewhere?
Yeah, so I was very confused with using jQuery, and I tried putting it in the script.js, but I got completely lost. So I started watching like a whole bunch of other videos on how to make something like click and then change color.
Okay.
And then this was another method that I found.
All right. It's just this is a pretty antiquated method of doing it, and a very inextensible method of doing it. I wish that if you run into a problem like that again, please feel free to shoot me an email.
Okay.
Because I could have helped you through this.
Okay.
But for one thing, writing our JavaScript directly in line in HTML like this in the onClick attribute is extremely antiquated. That's like a 1998 coding practice. That's not at all the way we would do this anymore. So first of all, one thing is that the reason nothing was working when you included it when you wrote it in script.js is that you don't have that file included in your HTML page. So in order to see here the way we have this script tag here and this imports jQuery, we need to write a similar one. And now this script.
Okay.
Now it's included in the web page. If I go here, and go to.
Yes, so I was like confused because one way was like to download the actual file and then like import it, right? And then the other way was to do the Google one.
That's for fonts. Google or are you talking about? Oh wait, no, this. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So but so either way, that's just for the jQuery library. And either way, it's a question of you can either save the jQuery.min.js file and upload it and include it yourself, or you can use what's called it can be hosted elsewhere. There's upsides and downsides to both. The upside of using a CDN is that it's distributed across multiple servers around the world, which helps save load time. Like say someone in San Francisco is viewing their web page, is viewing your web page. This file is going to get served from a server geographically close to them. The downside of it is that if you were working on this, if you had all these files locally on your computer and you were editing them, you know, in a full code editor, and your internet connection went down, you wouldn't have access to that file anymore. So, but either way, it's doing the exact same thing in both cases. It's either way, it's importing jQuery.min.js into this document, whether it's from an external server or whether it's from this server. Once you've got jQuery, once you've got that loaded, you can use the jQuery language in here in script.js.
Okay.
So I'm also going to add this defer attribute tells the script that I load to wait until the whole page is loaded in order to execute. That way it doesn't, that way all of this content will be there by the time this tries to execute.
Okay.
So at this point, you can see here in the sources file, you can see that script.js is actually being downloaded now.
Okay.
So now, just to sort of like drive the point home, we're getting a console log. So the script is loading and it's running. Now, in order to do this, what I was hoping to see you do is, instead of directly affecting the style like this, what I wanted to see you do was write two classes, or like write a something like this. And now, rather than directly editing the style properties, what we'll do is on this button click, we will just add and remove that class from the body. And that way, it's more easy. That way we can reverse it too. So what we'll do, take this out. Actually, that's the only button on the page, right? Yes, it is. So in that case, we can use just the element name to select it, since it's the only one on the page. And then we write and we'll put a function. So what we're doing here is we're binding something to the click event. And what we're binding to the click event is the function that we're writing here. So
is the first line like generic? Like anytime I want to do something along the lines of click and then change something, I would start with this exact line of the $sign and then button.click function.
Pretty much, yes. So the $sign is the $sign indicates that you're using that's the shorthand for, like, we're going to use jQuery methods here.
Okay.
The $sign means jQuery. Then this in the parentheses is where we put which element we want to select. In this case, we could do either by ID or by class. In this case, we're doing just by element name because it's the only one. Then we perform a method. Then we add a method. So in this case, we're using the click method to bind something to a click event. We could write this as, you might also see the same thing written as like that. This is the event type that we're using.
Yeah.
And, you know, so I could do, or like, you know, something like that, you know, but we'll stick with click.
Okay.
And it's just such a common, binding things on click is so common that that's why they just like wrapped it into a method like that.
Okay.
And then now, and then inside the function, what we're inside here, what we're doing is every time we click, do this set of instructions, right? So then again, what we're doing here is selecting the body of the page, and we're using the toggle class method to just add and remove that class name. So if I go back to my and now I can toggle it on and off.
Okay.
See how that see how that's not like we're not directly affecting the inline style property. We're just adding and removing a class.
Yeah.
It's also, if you wanted to say have if you wanted to repeat that functionality around the page with the way that you had it with, if you're using inline JavaScript in just the on-click attribute, you have to copy paste the same JavaScript every single time you want to reiterate that.
Right. Okay.
If you do it this way, we could say put it into a named function. And then now, if I wanted to reuse that code somewhere else, all I would have to do is just select another element and just bind the same function to it.
Okay.
Is this making sense?
Yeah, I think it's clarified most of the things I had questions on.
Okay,
but
great.
I think like just the language of like how to get started and what to type in was like hard for me to figure out, like even when I was like looking online, because not everyone's building the same thing as what I was trying to build. And yeah, the language just didn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, this is like your first JavaScript assignment. It took me forever it took me like certainly took me a lot longer than 1 week to get to a point where I was comfortable with JavaScript.
Okay, yeah, because HTML and CSS seemed a lot easier to understand and it was a little bit more intuitive. But this one just seemed like it was a lot more difficult to understand.
It is. We're getting into actual computer programming here, because like HTML is document layout and CSS is style rules, right? But here we actually have to think about sort of functional logic, programmatic thinking, like more into the like drifting closer to actual computer science kind of stuff. So it is getting into sort of like wrapping your head around JavaScript is probably the biggest leap in how you have to think that you'll be making this semester. It's but that's part of the reason I try to use jQuery, is that it takes a lot of the sort of rote mechanical stuff out and lets you think about just the flow of logic. But yeah, in general, if you're having trouble with the if you're having trouble with your assignment, just shoot me an email, and I will do my best to get back to you in a timely fashion.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, so let's go back to Weak sun. Okay, Sarah, we'll do yours.
Okay.
Okay. Nice. Okay, cool. Looks good. Let's see. Okay, so again, I would so this is actually I appreciate that. I like the fact that what you've bound in here are named functions. That's a great, I'm happy to see that. I would rather see you bind them to the I would rather see you bind these events to these elements in JavaScript rather than using the onClick attribute. It's just, there are several reasons. Doing it through the onClick attribute is a little outdated, and the advantage to binding it, doing your event binding in JavaScript rather than inline in HTML like this, is that if you wanted to say change what this button does after the first click, like you could either make toggle colors or make these elements really make these you could add a bunch of conditional logic into here. Like, say I want to let's make it so that the first time I click this button, I change the background color, and the second time I click the button, I change the text inside. If I was gonna do that all in the same function, I would have to instantiate a counter and start and create a number and start counting how many times I've clicked and that kind of thing, and put all the functionality into this, all into this function. On the other hand, if I bind and I'm using the on method for instead of just the dot click for a reason here. This is element 1, right?
Yes.
Okay. I can also since I've bound these in my JavaScript file, I can dynamically unbind them. I can unhook this function from button 1 and hook this one up to it instead on the fly in script like this. And then down here, and now, oh, okay, let's just do it this way. Okay, what's the error? Sorry, this usually. Oh, did I just type those selectors wrong? I might have typed those. No, those are correct. Okay, well, I think I can do bind and unbind, actually. Let me see. Yeah, let me try it that way. Sorry, I'm not sure why this isn't this should still work though. Let me try it with.
Why did you put like the P after element 1?
Oh, so that's because rather than selecting the div itself, I wanted to select the paragraph inside of it. So
Oh.
I can select a child inside an element by using a CSS parent child selector, where it's like sort of, this is the class name element 1 dot element 1 is the parent, and I want to select the first, I want to select a paragraph inside of it.
Okay.
So that's what I'm doing there. Let's see if this works. I don't want to get too caught in the weeds on this, but This is supposed to. Well, what on earth? Why is the... Oh, okay. I'm just, yeah, okay, my bad. Well, I'm using I'm writing this selector wrong. Either way, the point of the point I'm trying to make is that the advantage of doing your binding in the advantage of doing your binding in JavaScript rather than inline in your HTML using the onClick attribute is that you can dynamically unbind it if you need to and rebind that element to something else. Okay, what on earth? Oh. Oh, wait, no. Why? I'm sorry. Now I'm just. Yeah, I have ideas button 1, ideas button 2. Yeah, it's okay. So that selector's fine. So why is this not? Huh. Well, something is not working as expected here. And I couldn't. Oh. Okay. This is why you need that script.defer, or this is why you need to add that defer attribute, because if you don't have that, the JavaScript page, the JavaScript loads before the content of the body. So the reason that these weren't binding is that these events were firing before this part of the page had even loaded, before the button 1 and button 2 were even showing up. So if I just add that defer tag, now it's all working.
Oh. Got it. Okay.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot to keep track of. It's kind of
I guess another question that I had was like when I was trying to link, I guess the reason why I left the button dot on click was because I didn't know how to call the button. Like,
Right.
so I also saw that there was like a button name equals, and then you can also like name your buttons. Like, what's the difference between like, if I like had done that, like, how do you call that button? Do you still use the hashtag?
No. So name is an entirely different attribute that has a lot more to do. That the name attribute comes more into play when you're working with forms. But the hash always refers to ID and only to ID. So the way to select something by its ID is in jQuery is basically exactly the same as it is in CSS. If I wanted to select that button,
Yeah.
And make the font size bigger, or
Can you also then like do like button class equals rather than like ID? Like, does it matter?
yes, yeah. If I wanted to, okay, so that, yeah. So if I wanted to select them by their class name, let's give them, let's say this is class equals button 1, class equals button 2. In CSS, I would select those by going dot button 1, dot.
Okay.
Like that. Let's just say, something like that. That's how I would select those in CSS. In JavaScript or in jQuery, exact same selector.
Okay.
Just it's the dot notation for class name and the dot class name and then hash ID name.
Okay. Is there like, but ID is like better, like, I guess, practice in this situation because it's like one element?
Yes. So with yeah, you're on the right track there. So it's kind of with JavaScript, we tend to prefer IDs for binding events because since the ID is a unique identifier that can only appear once on the page, it allows the browser to locate that element and bind the event faster. Because since there can be any number of elements with a given class name in a page, the browser will, like, sort of when it's loading and starting to run the JavaScript, the browser will go through the whole page and keep going through the whole page until it's found every single instance of a given class name. So say you had like, a whole bunch more markup after this. In an ID, if you're selecting by ID, when you're loading your JavaScript, when your JavaScript starts loading, it goes down line by line. If it finds button class, or if it finds button ID equals button 1, it stops scanning there and just binds the element, right? Because there can only be one element of a given ID on a page. On the other hand, if we're going by class names, there could be any number of dot button 1 elements on the page, right? So the JavaScript parser has to keep scanning through the rest of the document, which could be very, very, very long. Because it has to try and find every instance. So, this isn't a universal rule, because sometimes you do need to have multiple elements on a page that you bind the same method to. In that case, you definitely want to use class. You want to use a class name because you've got to select multiple things. But if it's just one element that's only ever going to be bound to one function, or rather, if it's one function at a time, then it's better to use ID.
Okay, thank you. I don't want to like hold up too much time, but if we have extra time, I like really like just don't understand console log.
Okay.
Like I don't like understand like why that's needed / like what it does.
Let's tell you what, let's schedule a time to meet outside of class. Okay.
Okay.
Shoot me an email. Let me know what your schedule is. I've got time. I've got time pretty much any day except Saturday. So
Okay.
yeah, just let me know.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. Let's move on to, sorry, got kind of stuck in the weeds on that one. But let's move on. Henrika, let's look at yours. Oh, okay. Okay. Very nice. Okay. Let's see. Cool. Yep. We're adding and removing classes. Okay. Perfect. This is exactly what I want to see.
Yeah, it took me a long time to figure this out.
Yeah, I understand.
Really hard.
Yeah, this is this stuff takes a lot of time, a lot of effort to wrap your head around it first, because it's a very strange way of thinking. This is, you have to squeeze your brain into a computer shaped mold in order to get this right. Like and it's just it's a way of thinking that just literally, it just takes practice. It comes, it'll come with time, and it's always hard at first.
Okay.
But yeah, this is correct.
Thank you.
And Miri's not here, but we'll look at her assignment, and I'll just leave notes in it. And yeah, I know I've had lots of notes for everybody today, but please do not this is you're all still, you know, you're doing better than I did when I first started doing this stuff. Quite honestly, all of you are. Okay, so we're alerting. All right, let's see. Aha. Okay. We're using this. All right. Neat. Okay. So it's not quite what it's not quite what I was hoping to see, but it's still, there's something there. This is definitely still worth poking around with, but I'll wait and I'll follow up with this is kind of talking about how this, what the word this means in the context of JavaScript is kind of a big discussion. So and I think that that's kind of going to come up later in the lesson. So I'll hold off on dissecting that particular little nugget until after we have done today's lesson. Oop. So today we're going to get into, and I apologize, heads up, that this is going to be, out of all the JavaScript lessons we do, this is going to be probably the most abstract and just sort of computer science-y, hard to witness how it makes sense in the real world lesson. I'm just going to ask you to bear with me on this one because it'll all make sense in the coming weeks when we start talking about actual things you can build with JavaScript. But you need to understand, these fundamental concepts in order to actually start, say implementing things like an image carousel or using a library, using an external library of scroll effects, or implementing an animated cursor, or anything to that kind of extent. So this one's going to be tough, but please just hang with me, bear with me. So variables. We took a quick peek at them last week. I kind of alluded to what a variable does at the very end of the lesson. But put simply, in this big paragraph, variables are basically just, if you think of computer memory as a set of containers, variables are individual containers that you give a name, that you can label. So we use them to store information, and then that allows us to reference and manipulate that information by referring to it by name in a computer program. This also allows us to label data with a descriptive name, so that our program can be more easily understood. For instance, if say you're working on like a geolocation app, something that goes by location, or that pulls geolocation data like latitude and longitude data. If you just looked at the raw numbers, you would just see long strings of decimal numbers, right? It's some, very, 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 very long number. If it's stored in a variable labeled latitude, that value means latitude. If you have a let's see, like a 10-digit string of numbers, that could be that could just be a very large number, or it could be someone's phone number. It could be any number of things. It could be a user ID in a database. If you give it a name, if you stash it in a variable and give that variable a name, then you can tell what it is more easily. And then it also allows you to reuse that. Variables also allow you, it holds that information in memory with a label. Then you can recall it by that label and reuse it throughout a piece of software. This is basically computer science at this point. We're talking about concepts that exist in JavaScript, Ruby, Python, Java, C, C++, C#, Rust, Lua, Pascal, Basic, literally any Fortran, all modern programming languages. So this is basically miniature computer science at this point. How in JavaScript do we set variables? It's very simple. We call it declaring a variable, and we use the word let. And here, foo is the name of the variable, and if we say it equals 42, and then we print it to the console, what we'll get in the console is 42. Let me demonstrate this for you real quick. Right? So I've created a name and I've said this name equals this value. And then I can call that name and I can recall that value. I can perform calculations. I can manipulate that value. Now foo is 48. I can create other variables based on this variable. I can, and so on and so forth. And I can do a lot more than just basic arithmetic with it. It's just when basic arithmetic makes, I can get very, very complex with data manipulation, but basic arithmetic is one of the simplest and easiest things to demonstrate with this. So here we say that let is the declaration. That's the word that says create a new variable. Then foo is the name of that variable. Then the equal sign says, create a new variable, give it the label or the name of foo, and then set the value equal to 42. Is this clear so far?
I have a question. So yeah. What does 42 actually mean, like on the website? Like what will it display?
Right now we're literally just talking about doing simple math right now. So it's just the number 42. This hasn't even, we're a ways away.
Oh, like there's no meaning to 42 at the moment.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
We're a ways away yet from actually putting this into a web page. We're just we're just talking about, because variables are a thing that exist in, I mean, if you remember high school algebra, let x equal x or whatever. Like,
right.
This is exactly the same thing, just in a computer program.
Okay, that makes more sense. Mm-hmm. And so foo, like, can that be replaced by another word, like another like random word, however you want to label it?
I could just call it X.
Okay.
Let X equal 35. I don't know.
Okay.
Oh, but I need to, it's already in use somewhere. Okay.
Okay.
So let's say, let my variable equal 35.
Okay.
The name that you pick for your variable just describes what it does. So in the case of say that this is the underlying, let me try and put it into a little bit more context here. Let me say that this is the underlying information in a form where I'm putting in like a mailing address, where I'm putting in my name, street, my name, address, and phone number.
Yeah.
I could say, let name equal, or usually we separate first name and last name. So we would say let etc., etc. Right? So then I could So this is a slightly more real world application. This isn't exactly how you would do it, but
oh, okay.
right.
Okay, I get it now.
So just
okay.
the name of the variable corresponds to what is just sort of like a descriptor of describes what its value is, what the function of its value is, what the role of its value is.
Okay. It's kind of like Excel.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Excel, Excel is a variable driven program as well.
Okay.
Excel
okay,
is so close to being its own fully functional programming language. It basically is. But yes, if you know how to use variables in Excel, you know how to use variables in JavaScript.
Okay, got it.
Mm-hmm. It's just you have to think about them a little differently.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Quick question here.
Yeah.
So this is what I mean by like, I'm kind of confused, like why we're like defining things in the console. Like, does the console like show things?
Yes, it does. The console is, so remember what we said last week is that there are two basic ways to output information out of JavaScript. There's the alert, which creates an alert like this that halts execution of all code until you dismiss it. There's also, if you print, and so that ends up being visible to your end user, right? This is what the alert or something akin to the alert is what you use for, say, incorrect password, something like that.
Oh, okay.
The console log only prints in here, only prints in the developer console. So this is where, if you have, if you want to output information that is only going to be seen by developers and doesn't need to be seen by end users, you put it in here, because then most websites are always logging stuff to the console and nobody's the wiser, you know, like this is spitting stuff out. If you go to Facebook, well,
but it's like for developers to look at.
Yes, exactly. It's for so a lot of the time it's there as a development tool. That's why it's here in the rest of the developer tools, along with like the web inspector and things like that, is that it's designed as a place where you can it's designed as a tool that allows you to inspect and manipulate what's in memory for this like sort of what variables and what functions are in memory for this application. Like, remember how it said X was already defined?
Yeah.
Let's see what it is. It's a function. It's a very complicated minimized function, but it's a function. We can, let's see what X3A is. It's another function. We can, so this allows us, the console allows us direct access to the contents of the JavaScript memory, to variables and functions, and it allows us to directly manipulate stuff. The point of logging to the console also, the point of logging to the console becomes a lot clearer if you if you're working on a very data-driven application. You might find yourself just in the development process, and you need to keep track of, say you're doing a lot of manipulations on a certain value. I don't know, say, for example, I'm working on a video game right now where I building it in JavaScript, and the calculations that I'm using to generate the final score are pretty complicated, and I'm pretty bad at math. So I console log every step of the way, so that without having to stop execution of the code, I can let it run, and I can just have it print out all the values along the way as it runs, so that I can see where I'm maybe going wrong with my math. You know, that's one situation that I'm specifically using it in. It also, if there is if there's an error in your code somewhere, that error message will show up in the console here. See these messages in red? That's a JavaScript error that's telling me, what it's telling me is that something that it's trying to load externally is failing. But if I had but if, for instance, a really common one, if I tried to reference a variable or work with a variable that I hadn't declared, I would get an error in the console saying that variable hasn't been defined. I'll show that to you once we get to the code demo.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And also, yeah, just sort of like in algebra, the default in algebra, like high school algebra, the default sort of like the go-to variable name is X. In computer programming, it's foo. It's just it's the same role of just sort of like, you know, standardized variable name for, you know, just whatever. So there's several ways we usually we're going to declare variables using let, but there are other ways to declare variables. There's let, there's const, and there's var. And I don't want to get too into the weeds on this, but because I want you to be more comfortable with the concept of variables in general before we start really thinking about the distinctions here. But these are just things you're going to see in the wild. So var is the old way to declare variables. It's designed to be very flexible in ways that used to make more sense when web applications were way simpler. But now that modern JavaScript web applications are a lot more complicated, it makes a lot more sense to create new variable types, like to declare variables in different ways. And that's where const and let come in. These are newer. These are more specialized ways to declare variables. There are specific use cases to these, but I don't want to get too caught up in too much of a level of detail here. So just for now, let's just say that let is the preferred way we're going to use of declaring variables. I don't want to have to get into I don't want to subject you to a lecture on the ins and outs of global versus local scope and things like that. Not at least until you're a little more comfortable with this stuff. Now, variables can be any number of type of things. We can work with any number of things. The three most common are numbers, as in number equals 42. We've got, or I guess they I've got string is the word. String is the term that we use to refer to text in a variable. It is a string of text characters surrounded by quotes. So and then a Boolean is any true or false value. And these are literally the words true and false. So we can use an operator called type of to determine, say, a variable's come out, you know, a variable has been returned to us from a database or something like that. Say we're retrieving information from a database and we're not sure whether the, you know, say it's a customer record or something, and we're getting their phone number, and we don't know whether that phone number is formatted as a number or as text. We can use an operator called, we have an operator called type of that allows us to check that. So I can just write type of num, and it tells me that's a number. Type of message, it tells me that's a string. Type of bool, it tells me that's a Boolean. Now, in some languages, such as C or Java, you have what's called strictly typed variables. That means that if you create a number, it can only ever be a number. You cannot easily convert that number into, for instance, text. JavaScript is not one of these languages. JavaScript is what we is one of these languages. JavaScript is what we call loosely typed. What this means is that you can create a variable without specifically declaring what type of variable it is, and then you can change that variable on, you can change what type of variable it is on the fly very easily. This can be really convenient, and it can also be really confusing. We can easily convert strings to numbers. Check this out. I put the number 5 in quotation marks. Now it's a string. If I want to change it into a number, all I have to do is multiply it by 1. This, the times equals, is saying take this value and set it equal to itself times this value. It's a shorthand for string equals string times 1. And now it's a number. And likewise, we can easily convert numbers into strings. So let's change string back into a number by adding an empty string to it. This is a set of quotation marks with nothing in between. Now it's a string again. So data manipulation is very easy to do in JavaScript, which is a blessing and a curse, because it can be very, it's very easy to, you have to make sure that your variable types are always what you expect them to be, because otherwise you can end up, for instance, if I'm trying to do let's say oh, this doesn't really matter. 32 plus 32 is 64. But if I add 32 to a string of 32, I get a text string that's 3232. So this is why we need to, this is why it's important to keep variable types straight. Another thing that we can, another quirk of JavaScript when it comes to variable typing is that we can interpret things as true or false that are not Boolean values. So it doesn't, so a variable does not have to be a Boolean. It doesn't have to be the word true or false in order to be interpreted as true or false. We call these falsy values, and they will evaluate as Boolean false. The number 0, the Boolean value false. Both of these, let's say, right? So any number, so the number 0 will evaluate as false. Any number greater than 0, or I think any number other than 0. Let me see. Yeah, any number other than 0, greater than or less than 0, will evaluate as true. But 0 will always equal false, will always be equivalent to false. This can come in really, and believe it or not, that comes in super, super handy so much of the time. And we'll talk about the kind of we'll talk about the kind of situations where that comes in really handy when we're a little more into real world examples of this, implementing image carousels and stuff. But now comparisons, we've done some already. We've been doing these Boolean, these conditional checks, but let's talk about how we can compare values. It's the same ones. It's basically the same comparisons that we have in basic math. We can compare numbers by saying that they're greater than, or equal to, or exactly equal, or equal. Or we can say that they're less than, or equal to, or not equal. Let's say sure, okay, foo equals 24. 36. So we can say I can check these two values against each other. False. True. They're not equal. Therefore, a check that they are checking to see if they're equal returns false. Checking to see if they are not equal returns true. Is everyone with me?
Yes.
Cool. We can also check to see if things are exactly equal and not exactly equal. And let's go through what the distinction here is between equals and exactly equals. We can evaluate if I have, so I have foo equals 24. Let's evaluate. Let's make bar equal 24, but as a string. JavaScript will interpret that these values are the same value, even though they are different types, and equals will evaluate as true. However, if I do exactly equals.
I have a question.
Yes.
So I thought foo is equals to 24, right? But then bar is equal to 36.
I reset it.
Why? Oh, you reset. Okay, I missed that.
Yeah, I
line.
reset
Okay.
it here. I reset
Okay.
bar to the to 24, but as a text string.
Okay. Okay.
So so here what we're getting is that if we just check to see if they're equal, the number 24 and the text characters 22, the text characters 2 and 4, these evaluate to being the same value, even though they are different types. So, so 2 equal signs tells us, yes, these are the same value. 3 equal signs tells us, no, these are not the same, because one of them is a string and one of them is a number. These are different types, therefore they are not the same. Do we understand the distinction here?
Yeah.
It's subtle, but it's important. We also, you'll see this exclamation point quite a lot. It's called the logical not operator, and it literally just stands in for the word not. So for instance, if I write bool equals false, and I echo that value and I print that value to the console, it just returns as false. If I, so not false must be true. So anytime you see the exclamation point, it's standing in for the word not. Now, here's where it starts to get a little more applicable. We can also take HTML elements and store them as variables in JavaScript. If you're going to make a bunch of calls to the same element, you know, say in, you know, I think Sarah, in yours, you had a bunch of calls to element 1, like to dot element 1. If you're making reference, if you're making reference to the same element over and over again, every time you make a reference to that element, JavaScript has to sort of comb through the document and find it. But if you store it as a variable and then keep referencing it, JavaScript only has to select it once. So for instance, if I have a div with the ID of my div, I can store it as a variable by just saying let my div, or whatever variable name I give it, equal, in this case, the jQuery selection. Then I can perform all the same manipulations on it, but I can, but rather than selecting it every single time, I can select it once and then just reference it again and again. And what we are storing here is actually a type of object. We'll come back to this in a little bit. But before we do, let's look at the first code example. Actually, I think I will put it next to the code here. So I have so here I have 3 variables. I have a number. And what I'm doing down here, what I'm doing here is an example of what I was talking about with the storing a variable name as storing an HTML element as a variable. So I have a div in my page called put vars here. And I'm creating a variable. It says let put vars here equal that selection, right? If I open this in another so I have the values that I've declared up here are I can get to them, I can access them in the console. So I've got my variable, my string, and my I don't know. And I've got notice that that this one corresponds to an HTML element, right? I click on it and it pulls me over into here. That means that I can add stuff to that means that I can perform multiple now that I've selected it, I can perform as many actions on that element as I want, and I can without having to select it again, because I can just reference this variable name. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use a method called append. This is a jQuery method that inserts something that inserts things at the end of a div. So for instance, if there were already lines of text in there, let me just go ahead and say, you know, now I can and if I inspect this, notice how it stuck a new paragraph in following the one that was already there. If I wanted it to come first, I could use the prepend method, and that inserts it before whatever exists. So I'm checking here my variable and my string. Let's just add now it would be handy to be able to tell once we inject these into the document like this, we've lost touch of what those variable types are. It would be handy to be able to see that. So let's just add And so here, we're already starting to get to a point. Let me take this stuff out right now because we're not really using it. We're already getting to a point here where the real world applications of this could be should be, you know, are maybe looking might be looking a little clearer. For instance, let's say oh, also, I can set multiple variables at once using the same declarator by just comma separating instead of like, so I can either do let username equal John Doe semicolon, I can set, you know, I can set each one individually, or I can set both of these at once by just using a comma and then putting the semicolon when I'm done. So is it starting to look, so for instance, if this were like, you know, some website where we were logging in and maybe like checking, you know, trying different user, you know, trying out different users or logging in a bunch of different users, we might anything where we need to change this information on the fly. Like say John Doe logs out and Jane Doe logs in. If we stash these in variables, we don't have to, you know, then we can still use the same variable name and to insert things into the document. We don't need to worry about rewriting, you know, and we can reuse the same logic no matter who our user is. For one example, is this making sense? Does anybody have any questions? Stop me if I need to slow down or explain something.
So you don't have anything on like, can you go back to the HTML sheet?
Yeah. Everything that comes after this first line of text is being dynamically inserted from JavaScript.
Got it.
This is how a lot of modern dynamically driven web apps work, is that anytime you change anything, it's all of the data is stored in the front end in a big JavaScript object. Again, we'll come back to what JavaScript objects are in a little bit. But basically you have a big JavaScript application that's tracking the state of all the information in the front end. And anytime you change anything, it syncs everything up with the backend on a server somewhere. That's how you end up with, say, you know, Twitter knowing how to, or like the Twitter web page knowing to throw the show you the little notification alert when someone replies to you, things like that. There's a JavaScript variable somewhere that's being instantiated in order to display that. Does that make sense? I'm trying to ground this a little bit more, but there's a certain extent to which it's kind of like you're just going to have to bear with me through the tough stuff. But I hope this is making more sense.
So a lot of websites like that have like dynamic changing elements, just like their text is just like on in JavaScript versus like HTML.
Exactly. And then it gets dynamic. It's stored in JavaScript so that it can be changed up on the fly. And then it prints into HTML. Like here in my actual saved document, all we're seeing is this one element. But as soon as we actually get over to here, as far as the final page is concerned, there are 5 paragraphs in here, like what ends up actually being inserted into the document is more HTML. This is the entire strength and value of JavaScript, is that it allows you to manipulate and create and delete and destroy HTML completely on the fly. If I wanted to, let's see. All right. This is a selector that means first child, so it's only going to select the first paragraph. Oh, well, it removed all of them, but you get the point. Oh, right, it's the direct descendant. Right, sorry, that's not the one. That's not the one I wanted. I wanted. Right. So imagine something, again, going back to something like Twitter. Anytime like sort of that at the top of your Twitter feed, there's the little box that says, say 100 new tweets, and you click it and they all pop in without the whole page refreshing. Basically, this is what's happening, is that JavaScript is injecting HTML into the document. Okay. So there are a few things that there are a couple other things I'd like to talk about. Let's talk a little bit more about strings and manipulating them. So I can in the same way that I can perform mathematical operations on numbers, I can perform operations on strings. The two simplest of these are to join and to split strings. So and you've seen me do this a little bit. I'm actually doing, these are string joins in here. But so let's look in the console here. Notice what so see, I have 2 string variables. The first one and the second one. I have hello mother, that's one string. Hello father, that's another. I can join them into one single unified string by just using the plus sign. So what I've done here is I've done hello mother plus comma space plus hello father. And then that's what we end up with that's what ends up getting printed. That's what ends up getting injected into the DOM, into the document. Now, say I want to write say I want to include quotation marks in my string. This doesn't work, does it? Because I'm using a quotation mark to begin and end a string. So if I want to include this mark, I have to put a backslash in front of it to say, don't interpret this as code. Likewise, if I was this goes for the single quotation mark as well as the double quotation mark. If I want to use a single quotation mark, I have to escape that. Now we've joined a string here, but what happens if we want to take a string and break it apart and find individual and like, say we wanted to break this back down into two separate variables that were hello mother and hello father. I could do that by, so join is the name of the variable that stored hello mother plus comma space plus hello father. If I want to break that back down into two separate strings instead of one, I can use a method called split. And I tell it what the splitter is. So in this case, I joined them with the comma and space. So if I split them at comma space, I get hello mother, hello father. But these are packaged in something. Let's look at this. See how these are sort of like in square brackets like this? This is another data type. Oh, right. Okay. So if I go down here to, of course, yeah, everything's an object. But if I go down here to prototype, notice how this is called an array. Let's jump back over to the lecture slides. Let's talk about what that means. So arrays. When we took that string of hello mother, hello father, and split it and made two separate things, the way that JavaScript handled that was by giving us a list of two things, right? That's what's in JavaScript. We call this an array. Arrays are lists of information that can be read and manipulated. Items in an array can be added, removed, sorted, and reordered. And we instantiate them using square brackets and then a comma separated list of values. So for instance, if I say let my array equal foo, bar, and baz, I have an array with 3 strings in it, 3 words in it. An item's position in an array is what's called its index. So the index is a number that refers to an item's order in the array, first, second, third, what have you. And in JavaScript, arrays are zero indexed, meaning that rather than starting from 1, we start counting from 0. So foo is at index 0, bar is at index 1, baz is at index 2. And we can use the index to retrieve a specific item from an array. Say I wanted a function that got me foo, I could just go array 0 and pull the first item from it. So if I say let item equal array 1, and this is the way we reference items by their index, by the way, is the name of the array, and right up next to it, brackets, and then we stick the index we want to retrieve in these brackets. So if we output that, we're going to get the second item, because 0 is the first and 1 is the second, 2 is the third, and so on and so forth. So if we console log item equal, if we console log let item equal array.1 or array1, and we console log item, we'll get bar in the console. Let me just illustrate. Array 0 is foo. Array 1 is bar. Array 2 is baz. Imagine, if you will, you're setting up a photo gallery. And so you have a whole bunch of JPEG files. And you want to iterate through them by clicking left and right buttons. We would make an array that has references to each photo in it. And then we would write JavaScript functions to, when we click our navigation arrows, to retrieve the photo that is at that spot in the list and display it. That's exactly what we're going to do next week, just a little preview. But that's just a bit of a real world application for a data list like this. Arrays have certain properties and methods that allow us to work with them. We can check how many items are in an array by calling its length property. Array, remember, this is our array, is just foo bar baz. If we want to check its length, or we want to check how many items are in it, we call array.length. Note that the string type also has a length property, and it tells you how many that tells you how many letters are in a string, or actually how many characters, because it counts spaces and quotation marks and everything like that, or punctuation marks. Those count as characters as well. Anything that corresponds to like a typewriter keystroke is considered a character in a string of text. If we want to add something to our array, we can use the array.push method to insert something at the end. And now Notice that notice that ball came last because that's what push does. It sticks something in at the very end. We can retrieve the first item in the array using the shift method. And that gives us foo, that returns foo. And if we check array again, we've removed it. Likewise, I can get the last item from the array by using pop. And that removed that, but pop removed that item as well. If I want to check and see if an item is in an array, I can use the index of method. So array.index of bar gives me 0 because that's at the first point, it's the first item in the list. If I search for something that's not in the array, I get -1. I can also, let me just put a few things in. I can sort items in an array. Right now, these are all out of order alphabetically. If I call the sort method, I can automatically alphabetize them. Confusing thing here is that sort always does alphabetical order, even on numbers. This is very weird. So it always treats them like strings, even if they're not. So we can get around this using what we call comparison functions, but we'll come back to that. And this is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the kind of data manipulation you can do with arrays. We can also traverse the contents of an array and iterate over each item in an array using what we call a for loop. So if I have an array, here, let me just do, so let's go back to this array, this array with 8 things in it. If I want to go through the contents of the array and check each item in the array, I can use what's called a for loop. So here we have, I'm going to write for, and I'm going to put parentheses, and in these parentheses go a set of conditions. I'm going to say, start by initiating a couple variables. I'm going to create a variable called I. This is one where the variable name counts a little more. Generally, this is going to be our counter that we use to iterate over the array. We generally write this as I. We don't always write it as I. There are if you're already, for instance, if you're in a situation where you need to write a for loop within a for loop and you can't reuse this variable name, you might use a different variable name. But by and large, you're going to see I used pretty commonly as the to stand for index as we loop through an array. So what we're going to do is we're going to start I at 0. And then we're going to create a second variable that I usually call I. And we're going to set that equal to array.length. So we've got 0, and in this case, 8. Next, and then we put a semicolon after that. Next, we create a condition. So while this is true, as long as this condition remains true, I being less than II. So as long as this number is less than the length of the array is less than 8, we will carry out the instructions, and then we will we will carry out the instructions that will follow. And then after we complete each iteration, we increment I by 1. Plus plus is a shorthand for I equals I plus 1. It just means increment this value by 1. So now I put brackets. And I put a function in here. And so as long as this can, and so basically what we're going to do is we're going to start with 0, evaluate this, start with 0. This condition is true. We run this line of code, then we increment I by 1. Then we have 1, and then we have 1. If 1 is less than 8, we evaluate this line of code and do it again, and so on and so forth until we've iterated through every item in the array. So I'm going to run this. See how it did the same thing 8 times? We can do a lot more complicated, and so for loops can become much more complex than this. This is just a dirt simple demonstration of the kind of data manipulation we can perform using a for loop. So before we get into objects, let's take a look at I have a separate code example set up for just arrays. Here we go. Okay, so we have a bunch of functions in here. Why is it not outputting? Oh, wait, is it? Arrays output. Yeah, it should be there. Wonder what's going on here. Oh, right. Sorry. I used to have the variable, and I used to have all of these in one example file. And my students last semester said that was confusing. So I broke them out into 3 different ones. Okay, here we go. So now, now I'm checking, I'm using a comparison here to check if the and this is kind of a dumb comparison because I'm only because there could be more than one kind of, I could have both strings and numbers in the array, right? But all I'm checking on is, does the first item in the array have a length property? If I say that the first item in the array is the number 2, cars 0.length, the first item in the array is a number. Numbers don't have a length property. That comes back undefined. But the flaw here is that that's not a very good check because the rest of the items in the array can be strings. But either way, the way that I'm performing this check, another little tip, the question mark is what we call a ternary operator. And what this does is vastly simplify a true or false statement. This is the same as well, we'll just do if cars.length exists. So this statement and this statement are functionally identical. The question mark, the ternary operator does is given this value, if it evaluates as true, do the first thing on the left side of the colon here, or if it's not, do the thing on the right side of the colon. So this is a much simpler, or this is just a very convenient shorthand for writing out values that are based on a true false. Now, I can use that. I can sort the list of cars. Well, let me go back to, let me put, I think I had what? Yeah. So I can sort this list of cars. I can, let's see, I can check to see what the, and all I'm doing when I hit that button, sort on click, I'm sorting the array, and I'm just outputting it and printing it into HTML again. if I want to if I want to add a car to the array, I'm using the push method. I take the value of this input. Hopefully we're getting a little bit more real world here as well. So I have an input. It's got the ID of add me. When I click the button to add another car, I get the value of this array. Or I mean, I get the value of that text input field. If it's empty, I don't want to add empty items to this data. So if it doesn't have a length property, I send an alert. I say, please enter a value. This is what we call form validation, and we'll touch on in a little more detail later. But otherwise, if I want to, I add a car. What I'm doing is I'm pushing it to the array, writing the contents of the array to the DOM as text, to the document as text, and then taking the length and writing that into the document here. I can pull the first car out of the array. It's a Chrysler. Let's sort it again so that we just have, and notice that was using the shift method, which removes an item from the array. I can remove the last item from the array and return it by hitting get last car. This pulls the Volkswagen. Now I have 5 cars. If I want to just check to see what is at what index, notice that when I get by index instead of using shift or pop, I don't remove anything from this list. I just reference it. It doesn't change the array. It just references an item at a given index. Etc. etc. What we're doing there is just taking the value of this input field, which is just a number box, and let's see what happens if I pull a number that undefined, because there's only 5 cars in the array. So my index only goes up as high as 4. Now, I'm finding, now I can check to see if a car is in the array using that for loop. So let's check here. Let me go and let me jump over to sources. Yeah. So find this car. Let's see what happens. Remember, by the way, that you can get that the sources tab shows you your JavaScript files. And you can select a JavaScript file, pull it up in here, and you can work with, and that allows you to work with it in detail, like dropping these breakpoints, which allow you to step through a given function. So I'm going to add a breakpoint there and a breakpoint here. And let's hit find this car. So let which car equal the value of this input field. It equals Honda. If I hover over the variable name, I can see what it's coming out as. And I initialize this variable let is in list, and I initialize that as false. Now, oh wait, actually, hang on. I want to change this for a second. Now, this is the base, the standard way that we go about doing a for loop. Actually, let's do. So, which car is the value of this input field? It's Chrysler. Is in list is false. For, and we start our for loop for I equals 0, I equals cars dot length. Car equals cars I. So we just start with the first thing in the list. It's Ford. Are these equivalent? No, they're not. So we go again. Car is Honda. This evaluates as false. So we go again. These are the same. So now this condition evaluates true. We perform these two lines of code. Remember that not operator, that logical not operator. We can use it here to say, to swap a Boolean value from false to true by saying false equals not false. It becomes true. And then we use the break to end the loop because we don't need to keep, we found what we were looking for. We don't need to keep traversing this loop. Then we console log the index of the car we were looking for. It's 2. And then we're doing some sort of nifty stuff in here. We're using that true false value to determine whether or not to say a car is or is not in the list. And so then we alert our message. Car Chrysler is in the list. Now let's see what happens with one that's not. So again.
Wait, sorry, really quickly, where is the alert message printing to?
The alert message pops a dialog open that you have to dismiss before anything else can happen.
Did it just pop up?
Yes, it did.
Oh.
Yeah, it'll pop up again. Just don't worry.
Okay.
So again, this time we go through the whole loop. and we didn't find it. We get an index of -1 for Peugeot. And the message, here it is, right? Here's the pop-up. Car Peugeot is not in the list, is the alert that we get.
Sorry, where is the pop-up? I don't know where to look on this.
In the middle of the screen, right in the middle of the screen. Here, let me close this. Oh, wait. Sorry, my bad. Hang on. I got to share my whole desktop in order for you to see it. Okay. Now you can see the alert, right?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
My bad. I'm sorry. I forgot
confused.
that if you're sharing just the window, it doesn't include the alerts in that.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So let me go back to that though. So, but one other thing I wanted to show you is that this is not the only way that we can, this is not the only way that we have to write for loops. It's kind of the, this is more or less sort of a standardized method of writing for loops that is pretty much useful across, it's a basic principle of coding that's usable across pretty much any language. But in JavaScript, we can simplify it a little bit. Rather than instantiating that I equals 0, I equals cars.length, and counting through like that, we can just say for let I in cars. And what this will do is I will always be the index of this for each item in this array. And then it works exactly the same way. Right. It does the same thing either way. It's just this is kind of like a cross language solution for writing for loops. And you'll still see them written this way an awful lot. But this is kind of the simplified JavaScript way to do it. Specifically to JavaScript, though. Okay. So, and then real quick, let's talk about data objects. So when we bring up data objects, what are we talking about? An object is like a more detailed array. Instead of being just a list of items, an object is made up of a set of properties and their related values. It's not as easy to manipulate, but it stores much more detailed information. One way to think about this is that I actually really like the terminology that Python uses. I think it's a little more intuitive. They refer to arrays as lists and objects as dictionaries. So a list is just items in a row. It's just individual things in a row. An object, sorry, there's a fly in my room. It's been here. It's been bugging me all day. An object, on the other hand, is a name, or is like a property and a definition of that property, a value for that property. So in the case of talking about it, continuing with this car metaphor, we had, we had a list of makes of car, right? Ford, Chrysler, VW, etc. But now, if we're going into data objects, if we're going into objects, we can get much more detailed. We can say the car is a Ford, it's a Mustang, and it's blue. And this is how we would write a data object. So
Question. So
Yep.
why is it called var? Like the VAR?
oh, sorry. Yeah. This is that should say let. I updated the language in this to be all let, but var is the old way of declaring variables. I just missed that one. That should say let. I just missed updating it.
Got it. Okay.
But let's see. Console clear. So now so before our car was just in our list of cars, we just had Ford, Chrysler, Honda, etc., etc. Now, rather than just being the word Ford, we have a lot more detail about our car. We know that it's a blue Ford Mustang. Now here's where we start talking about methods. You've heard me refer to methods before, and I talked to I was talking about them as built-in functions of jQuery that are pre-made for you. But when you're writing your own data objects, you can create methods yourself. In this case, anytime that the property so here we've got a property that's brand Ford, model the brand is Mustang, and color is blue. So brand is a property, model is a property, color is a property. And right now they're all just words, right? Just strings, Ford, Mustang, blue. But if I added a function to this object, that would be called a method for this object. So if I take my blue Ford Mustang, just a second. Hey, let me call you back. I'm in class. Sorry about that. So if I want my car to be able to make noise, I give it a function that allows it to do so. So let's say, let's stick with brand. And now, so these are all things we know. We know that it's a Ford, it's a blue, it's a Mustang, and it's blue. But we want it to make noise. So instead of just a static value, I put in a function. Actually, and so now make noise is a function of that car. It's a thing it does. So I can refer, what's the brand of the car? It's a Ford. What color is it? And oh, right. You can't see that. Hang on. Here, I'll run that one again. So I did car.make noise, and it popped open an alert box that says vroom vroom. So the way that this becomes really powerful is that the end of the slideshow? That might be the end of the, yep, that's the end of the slideshow. So the way that this becomes really powerful is that this allows us to create and reuse data objects that have a lot of their own, that have their own functionality built in. So, oh, did I just open this and then delete it? Yeah. So I have, so here's what so here's my object, right? I can, and I have it here in code. So I can make this thing either say, oh, right, I need, so here's where that this comes in. This refers to, in this context, this refers to the object that we are, the object that this function is bound to. So let's see, are you still able to, yeah, okay. So you can see the car says I am a car. I can return much more useful information than that. So notice here what's happening. This just does return. So this spits out a value. If I call car.make noise, I just get the text. I am a blue Ford Mustang. When I hit this button, I am calling the alert function and then alerting the results of that method. So that's when it comes out in the alert box. Now I can change this. I'm alerting that it's a Ford. I'm alerting that it's a Mustang. And that it's blue. I can change this to a I can change all of these. I can set the make. I can set the model, and I can set the color. And now, and this I just wrote in here as demo code. So you're not seeing it update on the fly because this is just written statically in HTML here. But now if I check car, I've changed a bunch of stuff. Now our car is a tan Chrysler LeBaron. So we see how this is so much more powerful than a list. Now imagine, or than an array, because we can get into so much more detail and we can bind functionality into for just this car. Now imagine that I have an array. Let's make well, I don't want to like clone all the I don't want to clone all the, I'm not going to bother copying all the methods and stuff, but
Wait, Carl, are we supposed to like see you writing code?
can you not see the,
No.
okay, wait, wow, okay, this is really, all right,
Oh.
now you see it, right?
Yes.
It's really confusing as to what shows up in what view. I'm sorry about that. But so what I'm writing out here, I'm making 3 of these objects. I'm leaving the methods out for the sake of simplicity, but just imagine that they have these same methods. So I have 3 cars. Now I'm going to put them in a list. Ah, crap. I redefined one of these. So let me do, there we go. Now I have car 2 is a blue Ford Mustang. Car 3 is a green Nissan Altima. And car 4 is a Chrysler LeBaron. I can put all of those in an array. And now I have a list of objects. So I can say, first car in the garage is blue. Second car is green. Right, that doesn't exist. Third car is tan. So, so now imagine instead of now imagine that we are, say, let's go back to our analogy of a photo gallery for a real world web dev application. Before I was talking about using a list, excuse me, I was talking about using an array, and just having just the paths to each image, right? A reference to each image. Say we want to include things like, say, captions, or like, like a caption for each photo, a description. Say we want to include a title for each photo. We could have, say, let's call it this. This is, a path to some JPEG. Say I have a bunch of these. Or actually, you know what, let me do this. Slightly more useful. We have, so now I have pictures of 3 paintings, and with each one, not only do I have the path to each image, but I have the title and the artist. Right? Is this making sense? Now, if I wanted to, now in the real world, if I had, actual image files here, and as I was what I could do is I could set this up with functions so that, say I have, say the page loads and I'm on the first image in the gallery, and I have, so the first thing we see is the Mona Lisa. And there's a box that says the painting's title is the Mona Lisa and the painting's artist is Da Vinci. If I and imagine now that I have icon left and right arrows for paginating through this, and I click the right arrow. What we can do with JavaScript is go to the next item in the array and look, and now we have an object, right, that has an image path, a title, and an artist, and we can update the contents of the document to refer to this new, so that instead of showing the Mona Lisa, now we show the Starry Night. And all of this depends on using variables, arrays, and data objects. So all 3 of those are going to come into play next week when we do exactly this, build an image gallery. So that's basically the entire code demo. there's just one thing I want to that I want to add, which is that I think I've neglected to mention the document object model. The document object model is the connection between the objects or the elements in an HTML document and objects in JavaScript. The document object model is what allows me to say, let's look at a piece of code here or a piece of markup. So let's say I want to manipulate the content of this code object. The document object model is what allows me to select this, is what allows me to use JavaScript to select this element and interpret it into being a JavaScript object. And there's a back and forth relationship, and it allows a two-way relationship between the two. If I manipulate this JavaScript object, I can I guess I won't manipulate it directly through here. But if I manipulate this JavaScript object, I'll see the results directly in, if I manipulate this object, I see the results in the document. Right? So as we move on, you're going to hear me refer to the DOM a lot. And when I refer to the DOM, I am referring to the contents of a document. I'm referring to the elements in a document, but I'm referring to them in the context of JavaScript because JavaScript thinks of all of the elements in a document as objects. Okay, now I just wanted to. There's just a few other things I want to show you here, that don't have to do with the lesson, but that have to do with the things you brought up last week of like the kind of features you want to build into your projects. So I've got a few things here. Let's see. Miri, are you here? Okay. Miri's not here. That's okay. Well, let's see. Sarah.
Yeah.
You were curious about embedding a feed from your Substack.
Yes.
Yep, that is doable. So Substack exposes an RSS feed. So you can go to your.substack.com/feed. So this is a little roundabout, but Substack gives you RSS, which is like a standard way to get sort of feeds. And I'll email you these. I'll email you these particular pages that I dug up for you. And we can go through these together as you finish your site. But basically, because there is an RSS feed for your Substack, you can easily embed it in a website. There is there is a site, for instance, this page recommends using RSS include. Which isn't loading, but more or less, the answer is that yes, the solution is there is a solution for what you want to do, and we can figure it out. Chloe, you wanted lots of animation, and in particular, you were curious about styling the scroll bars. So yeah. Here's a page on CSS CSS tricks. Okay. We can we can get to the scroll bars. It's a little bit, this is going to bring us into the world of vendor prefixes, where basically you have to, this is one of those areas where there's not a standard agreed on set of rules that works in every browser for how to do this. So you have to use vendor prefixes to target specific kinds of browsers. It's just, it's still doable. It just means it's a little more work. So you use -WebKit as the prefix for Safari and Chrome. And then you use, and then if there's a -Moz one, you would use that for Mozilla. But I'll send you this CSS tricks page. And it links to more, it links to another document about styling scroll bars.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, with the animation, most of it is done through JavaScript.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I feel like after kind of having like an introduction to JavaScript, it might be too difficult for
no, because remember that you can do a lot of you can set up most of the animation in CSS, and then all you have to do to turn it on and off is use JavaScript to add and remove classes.
Oh, okay. All right.
One that is slightly more complicated though, Henrika, you were curious about animated cursors.
Yes.
I wish I could tell you there was an easy way to do it, but there's not.
Okay.
It's still totally doable. Just the way that you have to do it is you scroll all the way to the bottom here. So where we say the cursor accepts SVGs, no animated GIFs. It just shows animated GIFs as standard. But what you can do is use JavaScript. So this is this isn't raw JavaScript. This is something called CoffeeScript, but we can still interpret what's happening. Every time the mouse moves, we return its left and right coordinates. So every time the mouse moves, we return its position. And then we take this animated element and we move it around. Basically what we're doing is we're using CSS to hide the cursor. We're using JavaScript then to track the mouse cursor's position. And then once we've done that, we can take the animated element and move it to where the cursor is.
Okay.
So it's complicated, but it's doable.
Yeah, that sounds very complicated.
Right.
Can you maybe send me that link so
absolutely
that I
I'm
can
gonna
read it?
Yeah. I'll send you this link, and I'll tell you what. Also, since this is in CoffeeScript, we should go through it and try and translate it into jQuery.
Okay, so that is possible.
Yeah, totally possible.
Okay.
In fact, I'm gonna go ahead and say that, like, instead of a homework assignment, instead of like a code assignment or whatever, this week, everyone's assignment is just to schedule a one-on-one meeting with me, because we haven't done any of those this semester, and I find them really helpful, especially as we're going into doing final projects. So everybody just get in touch with me about scheduling a one-on-one. Mai Ting, you were also interested in the animated cursor, so I'll send this document to you also. And you wanted to build something very game-like. So maybe we can look at some other sort of some other JavaScript libraries that do for things like manipulating the background and stuff like that. And Gabriella, I didn't really look up a particular technical document for you because you wanted to do that Persepolis fan site, and it seemed like you were pretty clear on sort of on where you wanted to go design wise.
Yeah, I do want to do some animation, but I'm not really sure what to do with it. Like, I've seen fan sites are very static most of the time.
Yeah, they tend to be.
Yeah.
But Daphne, you were curious about the plugin that allows you to have a simulated mobile device on your page.
Yes.
Found it. It's called Envision.
Okay, cool.
And it allows you to, I'll show you an example of it on a former student's webpage.
Yeah, I've used Envision before. I didn't realize that you could do that.
Yeah, so I'll scroll down. This is an embedded Envision app. So it's just a mock-up, but this is all just embedded. This is just an object that's been embedded through Envision.
It looks like it's like a prototype almost.
Yeah, it is. It's basically a full prototype.
So Envision lets you create the prototype in the phone view?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And I imagine you could probably like take a screenshot or something if you just wanted the.
If you just wanted the picture, yeah, you could do that. Or if you wanted like the full interaction, you can embed the fully interactive object into a web page.
That's cool.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah. So if you're familiar with Envision, I'll just leave that. I'll just let you. Well, I'll send this to you just for the sake of thoroughness. But yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, thanks a lot, everybody. I'll send all these documents to you tonight. So just sometime before next week, let's pick a time, just schedule a time for me schedule a time for a one-on-one meeting with me. And I will remember to tell you when the video is uploaded tonight.
Thank you.
Okay. Good night, everybody.
Have a good night. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.